Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, September 11th. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news, read between the lines so you don't have to, and stay up late to give you our debate analysis. Jill, a special split edition of the Mo.news podcast. I'm here in Philadelphia, where I watched the debate from inside the spin room, media room, with like 1,000 members of the media from around the world. Actually, I'm sitting at a table right next to me is a reporter from New Zealand, Logan Church, who's reporting it live for the folks in New Zealand. Don't forget, this American election impacts the world, and so the world is watching.
And Moshe, I am on Long Island, where I watched the debate with a group of college students at Hofstra University. Really fascinating to be able to talk to young people and get their perspective on this election and what they thought of the debate. But before we get into all of the headlines, an acknowledgement, of course, that today is the 23rd anniversary of the attacks on September 11th. And we will have more on this solemn day a bit later in the podcast. For now, though, let's get to some of the headlines. The day after the big debate, takeaways from Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's first face-to-face meeting. In other news, a tropical system slated to make landfall in Louisiana today. And out west, fierce wildfires in California and Nevada forced thousands to evacuate, not to mention an oppressive heat wave making things worse. And a close call in Atlanta, where two Delta planes collide on a tarmac. And police release video of NFL star Tyreek Hill being detained after a traffic stop.
Yeah, this is a story we've been watching this week. The latest on what Hill is saying, what the police are saying with the release of that video. And Jill, we have a number of members of the law enforcement community, what they've been telling us about what they saw in that video.
One country taking action to keep kids safe online, where lawmakers are looking to ban anyone under the age of 16 from social media. And Moshe has on this day in history as we look back on the attacks on 9/11. Okay, let's start with the big story. Former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris faced off in a heated debate Tuesday night, sparring about abortion, immigration, Israel, the economy, and a host of other issues. Trump and Harris engaged in their first and possibly their only debate of the 2024 general election cycle. It was at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Tuesday night. A highly anticipated 90-minute showdown where they repeatedly accused each other of lying. The two met for the first time Tuesday night on the debate stage, with Vice President Harris introducing herself as Kamala Harris to the former president as they shook hands.
Jill, she began by walking across the stage. She was going to make a point of getting in his space.
And he is a known germaphobe. So she went and did shake his hand.
Yep.
And Moshe, she made it a top priority to get under his skin and bait him throughout the debate. She spent the next 90 minutes making every effort to get under his skin, hammering him over his criminal convictions, his handling of the pandemic, the size of his rally crowds, and the foreign and military leaders who she says have called him a disgrace. Here's a bit of what she had to say.
These dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear. They can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace.
Trump was on the defensive. In that case, he says at least he fires people like former military leaders, and that Harris never fires people. And he did often take the bait, responding to another one of her critiques on his rally crowds, foreign leaders, and how much money he inherited from his father. He couldn't help himself at times when she talked about what she said was his rambling at rallies, and again insisted at times on defending himself.
First, let me respond as to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics.
So clearly it was a strategy here. She was also helped at times by the moderators who fact-checked him several times, leading his campaign to say that it was actually a 3-on-1 debate. Some campaign allies were frustrated, saying effectively that the refs were biased here. Even so, Trump came into the spin room after the debate to talk about how he thought he won the debate. And Moshe, he told you and other reporters in the spin room afterward that he thought that this had actually been his best debate, and that Harris, who said that she was ready for a second debate, wanted a rematch because, quote, she lost tonight very badly.
Jill, you don't typically come in the spin room as the candidate yourself unless you think the night didn't go so well. So take it for what it's worth. Also, in talking to a number of Republican allies here, people who are very much pro-Trump. I was talking to Vivek Ramaswamy. I was talking to Byron Donalds, the congressman from Florida, Lindsey Graham. They admitted it wasn't Trump's best night. Now, some of them did like to blame the moderators here, but there's an admission privately, not on camera, that Trump didn't do very well. Not on substance, not on policy. Lindsey Graham apparently telling some folks around me that he thinks that everyone who prepped Trump for the debate should be fired. You're hearing the same thing from Chris Christie, who prepped Trump for the debate in 2016, being like, that was a horrible performance. She ran around him. She set him up every single time, and he took the bait every single time. I actually made a point of asking Matt Gaetz if you were tuned in live last night to the premium Instagram account. I went up to Matt Gaetz. I was like, Lindsey Graham says you should be fired as a debate prep person since you were involved in the team. He goes, I think he did a great debate. I mean, of course he said that. But the point being that while they're going after the moderators here, ultimately there's an admission among Republicans and conservatives. You heard it from Sean Hannity, some people on Fox News, etc. This was not a good night for Donald Trump.
Wait, so were you just like, wait a minute, is that Donald Trump walking into the spin room right now?
I started to see people crowding. I mean, you can watch the feed. We saved him on the premium Instagram account. And there were so many people. I was like, that's a big shot. And the first time I seen it was J.D. Vance. And then I saw Secret Service continuing to come into the room. And I'm like, this many Secret Service in a room mean that someone big is coming in. And this is the thing about Trump. And we can get to this further in this conversation. But he doesn't think that anyone can make the case for him like he can make the case for him. It's why he goes through so much staff. It's why he fired multiple White House press secretaries. That Donald Trump believes that Donald Trump needs to make the case for Donald Trump. And so that's ultimately why he came in here. And then if you followed me on Premium last night, we finished Trump in that circle. I'm like in this like crazy pen of 500 people trying to listen to what he's saying. It's hard to hear him. I'm like, I think he probably goes over to Fox News. So I walk right behind Sean Hannity. Some of you watching Fox last night might have seen me standing behind Sean Hannity with my camera up right in between Trump and Hannity, because I was like, he's totally going to do Fox tonight. And he did. He walked over there 5 minutes later, went behind the curtain. And so I had the front row seat to him on Fox News last night as he spun Sean Hannity. The point being that, even the Hannitys, the Foxes will admit this was not a good night for him. ABC didn't help him, but ultimately, he missed opportunity after opportunity here.
Let's get back to some of the issues. Abortion, one of the issues that came up often and early. Kamala Harris telling voters that Trump would sign a national abortion ban if it came to his desk.
To agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban.
Trump has tried to balance his pro-life stance and the fact that he put judges on the Supreme Court who overturned Roe v. Wade, but has also said that some states who have implemented much stricter bans on abortion have gone too far. Here is a bit of his response as he is trying to walk a fine line here.
Now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years. Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened.
Jill, you hear them cleaning up here in the spin room just past 12:45 a.m. here as we wrap the debate. Ultimately here, we mentioned the ABC fact checks. They fact checked him actually on that abortion comment after he said Democrats want to abort babies after they're born. Take a quick listen to that correction.
And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact.
So abortion, a difficult issue for him. He didn't navigate it so well. Some allies wanted him to pivot away from it. You want your candidate to pivot away from what is a weak issue, because ultimately he has got to win over the right, the pro-life right. But he knows, and he's seen this in multiple states, that the Roe v. Wade overturn is not playing well, and you have seen it turned over and over again in various state referenda. We've talked last week about how he flipped on the Florida referendum because he's trying to have it both ways. He's trying to, win over the right, the pro-lifers, the staunch conservatives, social conservatives on this, but ultimately he doesn't want to upset women in the middle and a lot of independents. As far as ABC fact checks, there was another one. This will get a lot of traction on social media if it hasn't already. This is Trump going off of a viral story that has been debunked about Haitian immigrants eating people's pets in Ohio. Take a listen to Trump and then David Muir of ABC.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
television.
television.
But the people
I'm
on
taking it from
television
the city
saying
manager.
their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Jill, we'll have further details on the pet eating viral story from Ohio here. Ultimately, there's some conservatives, again, who are like, this is what happens when Trump reads too much on social media and isn't going based on important issues. Because remember, what is he doing here? He's talking about migrants. Well, there are high-profile migrant crimes, right? There's high-profile numbers about the number of migrants across the border. There's a number. This is a winning issue for him among voters, immigration. Why focus on people eating pets that doesn't appear to be accurate here when you have a cogent argument about, to reinforce, your belief that, Trump reinforce your belief that Harris was in charge of the border here and could have done more ultimately here to stem the tide of illegal immigration. So just a lot of missed opportunities as we talk about. And again, this is coming from Republicans here. And we should note there were a couple moments for Trump on the economy. The first question out of the gate, Harris didn't have a great response. It was are people better off today economically when it comes to prices, inflation, et cetera, than they were 4 years ago? Harris had sort of a rehearsed response. Trump hammered her on the price of goods, how much people are spending at the grocery store. It's something we talk about a lot on this podcast. But then it just sort of went downhill for him after that. He didn't really hit healthcare in a sharp way. He didn't talk about tax plans making things more difficult for a certain number of Americans. He had arguments that he could have made here. Afghanistan, a big issue. Instead, he got defensive about his talks about the Taliban. He was talking about Abdul, the head of the Taliban here, who he refers to as Abdul, and he got defensive. And it seemed like everything Harris had planned, saying if we go here, he'll get defensive, he got distracted from the fact that he could have said that Trump and Harris haven't called the families of fallen soldiers, that the retreat from Kabul was a fiasco here. But he got hung up on being defensive here. And, we can admit here on this podcast, and you probably won't hear this from a lot of the media, that ABC didn't go as hard on Harris here, that they went harder on Trump. And that's not something that is new to Republicans when it comes to, the mainstream media, but he did not help himself by responding in a way that he could. And so ABC here didn't push her when they talked about her policy flip-flops. They didn't push her on not having an answer, that first answer on the economy. Are we better off than we were 4 years ago? They also didn't fact-check her on her claims about Trump in Charlottesville in the same way they fact-checked him multiple times. And still, Trump got distracted here, and that was the big issue. And that's one of the reasons that, as I talked to you from the spin room, Donald Trump was here talking to the media directly, trying to reinforce to all of us that he did a great job. Now, Jill, enough about the debate. Can we talk about what maybe is the bigger story out of this debate?
Well, I certainly don't want to bury the lead because I am quite the Swiftie, as a hint to people as to what's coming. But what did strike me is that for more than a week now, we have been talking about the different prep styles for Trump and Harris. And what it felt like to me watching, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I was watching with a group of students from Hofstra University, and I was watching with them. And look, the youth vote tends to go Democratic. And in this case, they were fully on board for Kamala Harris. But it did seem that she was just more prepared. She had her facts, she had her figures, she had her lines ready to go, and that he was kind of left a little bit on his heels on the defensive. And you have to wonder if he had just prepped a little bit more, if the outcome would have been different.
Yeah, ultimately here, I mean, she prepped the same way Biden did, but then Biden fell on his face, right? He prepped the same way he did last time, and Biden fell on his face. So, maybe he took that for granted ultimately here. But she went through full 90-minute debates. She hit her points. You can imagine if you were her debate coaches that they were cheering in the room as she was hitting a lot of points as he was taking the bait. Now, the question, of course, is how many independent voters are won over by this? It's a question I had for Roy Cooper, the Democratic governor of North Carolina. It's also a question that I asked. It's also a question that I asked Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut. And he's like, in the margins here, this might help. Ultimately, could we convert 10,000 people with this? That might make the difference in a state like Arizona or Georgia or Pennsylvania. So they're very pumped about this in that world. We'll have much more on this with clips, et cetera, on our Instagram feed today. But again, we mentioned, Lindsey Graham, Chris Christie, others who was like, Trump's got to fire. If there's another debate here, which again, the Harris people are asking for, Trump says, why would I do a debate? She wants a debate because she lost, which even his own allies don't really believe. But will this make a difference here? There's the Trump camp. There's the Harris camp. I don't think that the performance was so good that she's going to convert Trump voters over. But the question is in the middle. Did she win on the margins here? With no further ado, Jill, Taylor Swift filed her endorsement minutes after the debate on Instagram to her 238 million followers, writing in part that she was concerned about the Trump use of AI images of her to claim that he endorsed her, that she watched the debate and has determined, I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris. I'm voting for her because she fights for the rights and causes I believe in, and she's a warrior. She says she's a big fan of Tim Walz, who's been standing up for LGBTQ plus rights, IVF, women's right to their own body. I've done my research. I've made my choice. Your research is all yours to do, and your choice is to make. She says, she's not saying you must vote with me here, but she says she's done her research, and she's voting for Kamala Harris.
And she was also reminding people that in order to vote, you need to be registered. And so she's putting out links and making it easier for people to figure out how to register and where and when they can vote.
Yeah, it came up. Actually, I was live on Premium Instagram as the Taylor Swift endorsement comes out. And so people in the mo.news community were like, Taylor Swift endorsed. I was like, no way. I was like, I can't leave because I'm live right now. Guys, send me the details. So several of you texted me who know my phone number. And then I was asking folks about it. So I go up to Governor Cooper of North Carolina and I was like, hey, Taylor Swift endorsed. He's like, she did? I go, how do you feel about it? It's like, glad to have her on the team. Hopefully that helps. Then I go to Vivek Ramaswamy. I was like, what do you think about that? She goes, yeah, somebody adds, you're a fellow millennial. Like, do you think that'll make a difference? He goes, I hope not. And then Matt Gaetz was asked about it. He's like, I like artists who stick to art and not politics. So Republicans obviously not happy about it. People tried to shout it at Trump several times. That didn't go down. I shouted it. You might have heard me on TV shouting it at J.D. Vance, being like, what do you think about Taylor Swift endorsing? And he walked off on me. So it was certainly a moment in the spin room on Tuesday night. We'll see if it'll make the big difference. So there was no Beyonce moment at the convention. There is a Taylor Swift moment after this debate. So that might be a bigger story than the debate, frankly, though we will see how many people watch this when the ratings come out later today. Jill, we mentioned you were watching it with college students, young voters, known to be heavily Democratic. But of course, Trump has been making a push among young men who are increasingly conservative. You were on a liberal college campus last night. What was the reaction?
Moshe, I have to tell you, I couldn't find one person who said that they were voting for Trump. I watched with the crowd that I watched the debate with, literally laughing out loud at some of the things that Donald Trump was saying, from immigration to abortion to the dog eating, pet eating. They were literally cheering for Kamala Harris when she landed some of her lines, whether it be on the economy or Trump's criminal indictments. And each person told me that they were registered to vote and planned on voting. Now, this isn't exactly a
So these are people in New York, though, right?
These are people in New York. Some, though, are registered in their hometown. So some live in Colorado, others live in other states. Now, it is not exactly a random sample. These are kids who spent their Tuesday night at a presidential debate watch party.
Not typical fare for college kids.
Yeah, so not surprising that these are people who say they're going to vote and probably will vote. But there was a lot of excitement for Harris. We have talked about the gender divide, that women are going for Harris, men, though, favoring Trump. And again, at least at Hofstra on Tuesday, I did not see it. Even the young male vote was in the Harris camp.
All right, so that was a story over at Hofstra University. I think ultimately this will be dictated, as we're with several people in the spin room. They brought up the fact that ultimately, I think it was Gavin Newsom, that this comes down to 7 states, probably 40 counties, and tens of thousands of votes. That will ultimately dictate this. One of the goals, he said, for the Harris team, Harris had declared, I'm not Joe Biden, I'm not Donald Trump, and make this election about Donald Trump. She appears to have successfully done that tonight. The question is, will that translate to actual votes? Right now, Trump is still up in a number of these states. Remember who won debates in 2016, according to the polls? Hillary Clinton. Who became president that fall? Donald Trump. So for all of the import we give these debates, etc., ultimately they matter to a certain extent, but ultimately in this 50-50 country, it comes down to a certain number of counties in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and that'll be very interesting to hear in the coming days. And it'll be interesting to see if there's an actual ground game, what they call the ground game in politics. Will they actually get these people to vote, even after converting them?
Now to the speed read from the Weather Channel. Francine continues to strengthen in the western Gulf of Mexico ahead of making landfall as a hurricane in Louisiana later today. As of late Tuesday, it appears that it will strengthen into a Category 2 storm. Storm surge, flooding rainfall, damaging winds, and tornadoes will impact Louisiana and other parts of the Gulf Coast and the South. Most of the rain from this system is still offshore, but some bands have already wrapped into parts of South Texas and the northern Gulf Coast. Some flooding issues at known trouble spots have already been reported, and according to the National Weather Service, some locations have already picked up 7 to 8 inches of rain.
A hurricane warning is in effect along the Louisiana coast as well as parts of Texas. Set to make landfall this evening. You're already probably starting to feel the effects in Louisiana and Texas as the storm starts to come ashore here. Again, the projection about 18 hours out is a Category 2 landfall, but of course there's warm Gulf waters that could lead to further intensification here. So it is worth monitoring throughout the day here. Schools across a wide swath of Louisiana are closed today and tomorrow. The Mississippi and Alabama border are also getting a storm surge warning. Remember, with a hurricane, it's not just the winds, it's the rain, it's the storm surge. There's a lot to this. Dry air has been a limiting factor for strengthening since Monday night. And there is some wind shear, which could cap off the amount of intensity the storm has. But Francine is making a renewed run at intensification in the final hours before landfall. After landfall here, it will move relatively quickly to the north. So look out if you're in the Mississippi and Ohio Valley. You'll see the impact and the aftermath of the storm in the coming days.
And Moshe, definitely notable that we are mid-September and we are on an F-named storm. Usually we would be much further along. As we reported, there was kind of a lull in the storm systems for various reasons, but forecasters did predict that things would pick back up.
Yeah, well, the predictions were like 24 named storms this cycle, which would put us very far into the alphabet, right? But ultimately, as you mentioned, Francine, F storm. And so we didn't get the season that we thought, but still, hurricane season, a reminder, runs through November.
From CBS News, officials are investigating after a Delta plane collided with an Endeavor Air flight on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport in Georgia. Endeavor Air is a Delta subsidiary. The FAA says that Delta Airlines Flight 295, an Airbus A350, was taxiing for departure to Tokyo, Japan, shortly after 10 a.m. when its wingtip struck the tail of the Endeavor Air Flight 5526. The Endeavor plane was headed to Lafayette, Louisiana. The planes were on alternate taxiways when that collision happened. And NBC News is reporting that many of the passengers on board that Endeavor flight were actually journalists heading to cover Francine in Louisiana.
So this is what we know. There were 221 passengers aboard the Tokyo-bound Delta flight, 56 aboard that Louisiana flight. A spokesperson for the airport says there were no injuries from this collision. Notably, the Airbus A350, one of the largest planes Delta has, the Bombardier CRJ-900, one of the smallest planes in Delta's fleet. With fuel, the Airbus weighs 600,000 pounds. The Bombardier weighs 70,000 pounds. So the FAA here is going to investigate what happened. And there's a few different options here, Joe. One, pilot error. Two, air traffic control error, sending them the wrong way at the wrong times. Or, frankly, as simple as bad markings on the runway as the pilots were making their way down the taxiway here. This could have been much worse if they had collided as one was, moving towards takeoff. But ultimately here, still a concerning incident, and one they will have to get to the bottom of because Atlanta Hartsfield, the busiest airport in the world.
From Axios, fast-moving wildfires in California and Nevada have left tens of thousands of people under mandatory evacuation orders, numerous structures threatened, and air quality impacted as a dangerous heat wave continues to grip Southern California in particular. California Governor Gavin Newsom activating the National Guard this week in response to the massive line fire in San Bernardino County. It is one of 9 large fires in California and 71 large fires that are burning across the western United States as of Tuesday. Meanwhile, Nevada's governor has also declared a state of emergency in response to the Davis fire that is south of Reno. Evacuation orders there have affected about 20,000 people. Back to the line fire, it has razed more than 25,000 acres since igniting on Thursday, and as of yesterday was only 5% contained. Many of the threatened structures include single and multifamily homes. The fire erupted within part of what is known as the wildland urban interface. It's where development borders forests.
Yeah, so evacuation orders are in effect for much of San Bernardino County, along with parts of Riverside County. They've had an excessive heat warning. I mean, the heat in Southern California has been pretty extreme. California has actually had the hottest summer on record this year. But the good news is yesterday was likely to be the last day of triple-digit heat during this particular event for portions of Southern California. But still ways to go when it comes to the fires right now. Firefighters across the region are tackling a number of large fires, 24 in total in Oregon, 20 in Idaho, 13 in Montana, 5 in Washington, 3 in Wyoming. Several of the fires in California, Oregon, and Washington are forming their own thunderstorms with extreme and shifting winds at the surface, making it more difficult for firefighters to fight the flames. They basically become their own weather event inside the fire here. If you've seen lightning and those storms that are part of some of these larger wildfires.
Moshe, that reminds me from that line in Armageddon. Owen Wilson's character says, okay, so the scariest environment imaginable, which is basically what that is.
Yeah. I mean, credit to these firefighters that sometimes are dropped into the fires to be able to fight them. Smoke jumpers, I believe they're called. But it's been a rough summer for these firefighters. Again, the record heat in California started to come down here, but fire season continues. And one of those fires in California that you mentioned at the top, 3,000 acres destroyed, 0% containment at the moment.
From CNN, the Miami-Dade Police Department has released officer body cam footage of an incident involving NFL player Tyreek Hill on Sunday before the Miami Dolphins game. The footage starts with police officers pulling up next to Hill's car and telling him that he was speeding. Hill asks how fast he was going. He's instructed to pull over. The officer knocks on the window to get him to lower it. Hill tells the officer not to knock on his window like that as he hands over his driver's license. Hill then tells the officer to just give him his ticket and rolls the tinted window back up. The officer demands that Hill keep his window down. Here is a clip from the beginning of the encounter.
Hey, don't knock on my window like that, man.
Why don't you have your seatbelt on?
Don't knock on my window.
Why don't you have your seatbelt on?
Don't knock on my window like that, no.
Like what?
Don't knock on my window like that.
Why you have it up?
Don't knock on my window like that.
Why you have it up? I have to knock to let you know I'm here. That way you can lower it and talk to you.
Just get my ticket, bro, so I can go. I'm finna be late, gang. Do what you gotta do.
Keep it down. Hey! Keep your window down. Hey! Keep your window down.
Don't tell me what.
Keep your window down. I'm gonna get you out of the car. As a matter of fact, get out of the car.
Give me that.
Get out of the car.
Give me that. I'm gonna break that freaking window.
Get out of the car.
I'm finna get out.
Get out of the car right now. We're not playing this game. Get out.
I'm finna get out. Get out. Get out. Get out. Get out. What part of blood are you in this town? Hey, Drew, I'm getting arrested, Drew. I'm getting arrested. I'm getting arrested, Drew. I'm getting out. Twin.
When we tell you to do something, you do it. You understand?
I'm getting out.
You understand? Not what you want, but what we tell you.
So in case it's not clear from listening, again, the officer is basically knocking on Hill's window and eventually pulls him out of the car, throws him to the ground to handcuff him. Later in the video, you could hear Hill saying that he just had surgery on his knee. The Miami-Dade police say that there is now an investigation into the incident and that the officer involved was placed on administrative duties. But Moshe, we did get some pretty fascinating insight from police officers who follow the Mo.news Instagram account.
Yeah, several members of the law enforcement community say they watched the tape. And some said, listen, I don't knee-jerk defend every cop. I know some cops don't behave well, but in this case, Hill wasn't cooperating with the cops. The idea that you leave your window up when you're pulled over, or you then bring it down, heavily tinted window, you pass the idea, and then suddenly Tyreek Hill moves the window back up again, leads to a lot of concerns on the part of cops. Are there guns in the car, people in the car, drugs in the car? That's not normal. That's defiant behavior. And so that becomes concerning to the cop. One law enforcement officer telling us, effectively, the way that we go is ask, tell, make. That's the order of events. You ask someone to do something, then you tell them to do something, and then you have to make them do something. And because Hill wasn't really being very responsive initially, they went very quickly to make. As in, make him do what they're saying, including putting him in handcuffs until they have the situation assessed. Now, at the same time, people are saying he's driving a $350,000 car a couple miles from the stadium. It's clear who he is. He's an athlete. Did the cops have to escalate in that way? And when we talk to law enforcement officers who follow the Mo.news Instagram account, they say, listen, Tyreek Hill wasn't being as responsive as he should. But at the same time, I imagine there'll be some training happening among cops about other things they could have done to potentially de-escalate that situation besides taking him down to the ground and putting him in handcuffs. But ultimately for cops, one of the most dangerous things in the country annually for police officers is being shot by somebody as they pull them over. And so somebody constantly putting up their tinted window immediately raises alarm bells for police officers. Jill, Tyreek Hill is speaking out. He actually spoke on Caitlin Collins over at CNN's show. Caitlin Collins, a friend of the pod, a friend of Mo.news. Hill telling Caitlin Collins that he is still shell-shocked by the encounter. It happened so fast. He claims, again, he was cooperative. Now, this tape tells a slightly different story, right? Not as cooperative as others may have been there. So we'll see what happens here. There is that internal investigation happening, demands from the Hill team that cops be fired over all this. We'll continue to watch it unfold.
And Moshe from the New York Times, Australia plans to bar young children from social media. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, taking to his social media accounts to announce that his government wants to set a minimum age to use social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram. For now, the government is considering 16 as the minimum age, a move he said is designed to reduce online risks for children. The Prime Minister saying, quote, it is about supporting parents and keeping kids safe.
Yeah, it's notable. In Australia, it's one of the world's most online populations. 4/5, more than 80% of the population, about 26 million people, are on social media down there. But while this plan does have some support, there are critics in Australia who claim that this will create serious harm by excluding young people from meaningful, healthy participation in the digital world. That's according to a digital research center down at Queensland University down in Australia. So we'll see what happens. If they enact this law, it'll be one of the first governments to forbid young children from social media. Remember, here in the US and on most social media platforms, the age is usually about 13 or 14. Florida, specifically in the state, has barred children under 14 from social media. Instagram and Facebook, which are owned by Meta, TikTok, typically require people to be 13 years old to sign up for their services, but it's not hard to get around them. Millions of underage children have been able to set up accounts by providing, what else? A false birth date. No real ID check on those platforms.
You don't even need one of those fake IDs, Moshe, when people come to your house and put up a fake background. Not that I would know anything about that from my youth.
But at 13, you don't have an ID. You don't even have a driver's license yet, so. All right, we end here with On This Day in History on this September 11th. Many of us remember exactly where we were on that morning and in the days subsequent. 23 years ago today, 2,977 people were killed in the deadliest terror attack in American history. 4 planes hijacked. 2 were intentionally crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City. The buildings collapsed shortly thereafter. 1 plane flew into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. A 4th plane, believed to be headed for the White House or the U.S. Capitol, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers fought the terrorists and regained control of the cockpit. There was a time back then where you had those plane phones, and they were hearing from people because they were low enough to the ground about what else was going on. Because remember, it was a new concept that hijackers would actually intentionally crash the plane. Hijackings had been happening for decades, where the hijackers would then land the plane somewhere and make a demand. The idea that they would turn them into missiles was a new concept there, and they were learning it in real time on that 4th plane. Of course, everyone around the world watched in horror as that day unfolded. There are remembrance ceremonies being held today. Starting at 8:30 in the morning, the first moment of silence will happen at 8:46 in the 8. Will happen at 8:46 a.m., the time the first plane struck the North Tower. Moments of silence will then follow at each of the sites throughout the morning.
And Moshe, as the years pass, more and more of the names are read by children or young adults who were born after the attacks. Last year's observance featured 28 young people among more than 140 readers, and young people again are expected at this year's ceremony today. Some are children of victims whose partners were pregnant at the time of the attack. Other young readers are victims' nieces, nephews, or grandchildren. One of those is 13-year-old Alan Aldicki. His grandfather was a firefighter killed that day. He tells the AP, quote, "It is like you're passing the torch on." They also interviewed 18-year-old Callaway Treble. He says his generation of 9/11 families needs to carry forward the victim's memory. He lost his aunt, Gabriella Silvina Waisman, saying, we use this term never forget for 9/11 all the time, but keeping that in practice and making sure that we actually don't forget that thousands of people died in an attack on our country is extremely important. So more and more of these kids, as the AP notes, are starting out by saying, quote, "Even though I never got to meet you." Just really poignant when you think about how much time has actually passed. So heartbreaking. And as I've mentioned on this podcast before, this day is particularly difficult in our house as we remember my husband's best childhood friend, Brooke Alexandra Jackman. She was working for Cantor Fitzgerald. She was killed in one of the towers. But this was actually the first year that we tried to explain to our daughter in a very kid-friendly kind of way what happened, and that she was named for Brooke because she came home from school on Tuesday saying, we're wearing red, white, and blue tomorrow. And I was just, I out of curiosity, I asked her, do you know why you're doing that? And she said something about an attack in towers. So I said, all right, maybe she's ready to hear a little bit about what happened. But it's just this idea of, for us, it feels like it was just yesterday, but there is this whole generation who was not around. And we really do bear the responsibility to make sure that they never forget.
Yeah, time passes quickly here, Jill. Suddenly, you're explaining to younger people in the newsroom, journalists who are covering, the events around the world, what happened 9/11, because, they're relatively young, and some of the newest group were born after that, or, they might have been 1 or 2 years old when it took place. And it is a hugely consequential event that where we are today can partially be explained by the events and subsequent reactions of that day by the U.S. And all these various things that we're dealing with around the world. And so it's a super important. So it's a super important piece of history when it comes to explaining the state of the world today, but is of course also hugely consequential to all the people who are impacted that day. So thinking about all of you today, and Jill, I can imagine navigating that where you don't want to scare them, but you need to explain to them about the state of the world. Threading that needle is challenging.
Yeah, not easy. I try to frame it as, we are keeping her legacy alive. She was such an incredible person, and my daughter gets to keep that alive in her. So that was kind of the needle that we've been trying to thread. That is going to do it for this episode of the Mo News podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Share this with your friends. Again, it really helps us grow. Appreciate it.
See you guys tomorrow.